Hey, Broken Tea Society. My name is Jon Sherman, and I'm here to help you play better golf through a 6-part series of lessons that are only available to members. Best part is, we're not going to talk about your golf swing once. If you don't know who I am, as I said, my name is Jon Sherman, and about a decade ago, I started a website called Practical Golf. And my main goal was to educate golfers on every topic outside of the golf swing. I felt that the instructional world had the swing covered, and I wanted to explore topics that I felt were more important in lowering scores and increasing enjoyment outside of the golf swing. So after a bunch of years of writing articles on the site, eventually I turned that into a book called The 4 Foundations of Golf, which released in 2022. That's going to be a lot of the topics we discuss in the video series today. Fortunately, that book has gone on to become an international bestseller with almost 100,000 copies sold. So I'm pretty confident that these concepts can help you. But most importantly, I'm a player coach and I'm a golfer just like you. I coach on the PGA Tour now and I help players of all levels. And a lot of what I've learned is through my own mistakes and trial and errors in my own game. So for a long time, I was a tortured golfer and I really wasn't reaching my potential. And over the last decade, I've figured out a lot of stuff, and I've been able to get my handicap down to a +2. I've become a fairly good competitive golfer. I've won a few club championships. I've done well in regional tournaments. And most recently, I was able to win a USGA medal and punch my ticket to the US Mid-Am. So my goal is for everyone who's a part of the index experiment to get 1 or 2 big ideas from this video series that will lower your handicap and increase your enjoyment of golf. So when I first wrote The 4 Foundations of Golf, the topic that I kept hearing over and over again was helping people the most was expectation management. So that's what we're going to start this course off with, expectation management. And in Module 1, we're going to talk about my golf happiness equation as well as my 2/3 rule. And I think this will help give you important perspective shifts in your game so that you can enjoy golf a little bit more and, more importantly, not be so hard on yourself. So let's talk about finding more happiness in golf and how you find your happiness equation. My belief is that golf is such a difficult game that if you are not finding joy, having passion, and more importantly, having fun and are happy along the way in the process, your handicap is never going down. And I've been playing this game for over 30 years, and I've unfortunately learned this lesson the hard way. And one way I always help manage golfers' expectations is by telling stories. So let me tell you a deeply embarrassing story about when I kind of reached rock bottom in my game and figured out my golf happiness formula. About 15 years ago, in my mid-20s, I wasn't really playing much golf. I would maybe get out to the course 10 or 15 times a year. I was living in New York City, which is not conducive to playing a lot of golf. And I had this really unfortunate relationship with golf where I would go out and say, well, this day can only be a success and I can only have fun if I shoot a low score. So for me, that was in the 70s. But unfortunately, my ability wasn't in line with that, so I would face a lot of disappointment. So one day, I was on a family vacation, and I was playing golf in Florida with my dad. It was a beautiful day, sun shining, spending some good quality time with my dad, who actually took up golf later in life. And the round went like a lot of rounds went at that time in my life. I didn't play well in the beginning, so I was really in a foul mood. I wasn't very friendly to my dad. And I realized that I wasn't going to shoot the score I wanted to, so I was just kind of puttering along in the round. So we get to the 13th hole, and I hit a perfect drive. And I remember stepping up to this shot. It was about 155 yards, an 8-iron for me. Green's on the left and water's on the right. And I said to myself, you better hit a good shot here. And I did not. I left the face wide open, and I'm watching this golf ball sail into the water hazard, and something inside of me snapped. Unfortunately, I turned around and I flung my 8-iron at the golf cart. And what happened next was a bit sad and ridiculous. It kind of happened in slow motion. The 8-iron hit my driver head, severed it right on the neck of it, and then I'm watching this driver float in the air as it got severed, and it kind of perfectly impaled itself on the fairway. And my dad looks at me and he just has this horrible look of disgust on his face. And he doesn't say a word. He just walked off the golf course. That hurt me a lot. I don't think I'd ever seen that much disappointment on my father's face. So I knew at that point that I had to change my relationship with golf. What I needed to do was reshape my expectations based on where I was currently in my game. So this kind of was the beginning of my golf happiness equation. You can kind of think of it like a Venn diagram, but I think golfers are most happy when their expectations line up with their ability. And what I mean by ability is how much time they can put into their game with practice, how much time they can play, and what their physical skill level is. And when you can match these two things up, when your expectations can align with your abilities, then I think you can be happier with your game. So at this point for me, I wasn't in my 20s. I wasn't able to play a lot. I wasn't able to practice a lot. So I had to adjust my expectations downward. So I told myself, when you do get a chance to play golf, don't use it as like this big test for your game. Just try and go out there and enjoy yourself and not worry about the score. And that worked for me at that time. After I had that horrible day, I had to say to myself, well, your expectations have to go down now. When I was older and I moved out of the city and can finally play more, and when I first started practical golf, I could play a ton. I could work on my game a ton. Therefore, I can raise my expectations. And I think every golfer needs to figure out this equation for themselves. There's no right answer for everyone, but you need to sit down and reflect and say, how much time do I have? Can I practice a few times a week? Can I play a few times a month? If so, then yes, you can have higher expectations. But I think most golfers get in a trap where they don't really understand what they can expect from themselves, and they're just endlessly disappointed. One thing I'll ask you to reflect upon as we go through different modules is that how are you going to find happiness in your golf game? Will you find more joy and happiness in golf rather than just focusing on the results and your score? And think about the time you can devote to this game and how it aligns with your expectations. And again, there's no right answer for everyone, but if you're not enjoying yourself and you're not happy, as I said, your handicap's not going to drop. So I think this is like a fundamental relationship. You have to get it right. So now that we've discussed joy and happiness, I want to talk about another concept called the Two-Thirds Rule. So this was one of my first blog posts when I started practical golf back in 2015. And something about the way I described this really resonated with people. So I did include it in the book, The Four Foundations of Golf, and it's always one of people's favorite chapters. So the basis of the Two-Thirds Rule is that most golfers go out thinking that all parts of their game need to be firing on all cylinders in order to shoot their best scores. So they kind of go out on this short mental leash saying that I need to drive it well, I need to hit my irons well, and I need to have a great short game in order to shoot my best scores. And I found out the hard way that if you go out expecting all of that, you're just gonna be more frustrated. The truth is that you don't. That's really the basis of the Two-Thirds Rule, and I'll explain it for you. So there's three phases of golf for simplicity. You've got tee shots, approach shots, and the finesse game, which is anything inside 100 yards, which would be obviously your wedges and your putter. I found that my best scores and watching a lot of other great golfers was that you only need 2 out of 3 of those parts of your game to be above average to shoot your best scores. So for example, I've had some great rounds where I've shot under par, where I drove it well and I hit my irons really well, but I didn't particularly make a ton of putts and have exceptional wedge play. I just made birdies on par 5s with easy 2 putts. Didn't shoot myself in the foot with my wedges, and I was able to shoot under par in those rounds. It's not that you need to be getting all 3 of them spectacularly well. The only exception to that would be when you saw Jim Furyk on the PGA Tour shoot a 58, or some other players who've shot in the low 60s. That's a whole different game at the pro golf level. So I wouldn't expect that a normal golfer could get all 3 right. So it's really important to understand that you can shoot your best scores when one part of your game is feeling uncomfortable, and hopefully you can breathe a sigh of relief so that you don't put so much pressure on yourself and expect that everything's going to work well, because when you do, eventually you're going to hit a bad shot and you're like, oh, here we go. Now we're off on a bad track. So you can shoot your best scores when only 2 out of 3 parts of your game are working well. I find the more important part is living in a zone between those 1 out of 3 days and 0 out of 3 days. So I would say that most golfers are going to struggle with at least one, probably two parts of their game. And the real key to lowering your handicap is not necessarily the 2 out of 3 days. It's more avoiding those 0 out of 3 days. How can you make sure that when things aren't going well, still select good targets, you can still have a positive attitude, you can still go through your routines? So I think the real goal of any golfer who wants to lower their handicap is avoiding 0 out of 3 rounds. And I think that's within everyone's control. And that's essentially why I wrote my book, why I've been blogging all these years and doing the podcast, is that I'm trying to figure out different ways to get you to those 1 out of 3 days where you're not giving up, you're still engaged in the round, you're using different mental tools, strategic tools, anything you can to make sure that the round is not a total disaster. And that's really within everyone's control. And I know that's not sexy or exciting, and it's kind of why I came up with my initial catchphrase that I'm fighting the war on double bogeys, but that's really what separates a great golfer from the good to below average ones, is that they're able to take rounds where they're struggling with 1 or 2 parts of their game, or even all 3 of them, and still manufacture a score. The way I like to wrap things up to neatly summarize the 2/3 rule is that you don't need to be perfect to have a great round of golf. You need to be patient. At least one part of your game is going to abandon you, and that's perfectly okay. It's nothing to panic about. So if you remind yourself that mistakes are okay and you have the mental resolve to dig in, then you are going to improve. Never go out expecting that you need to be perfect and that everything's going to go well. It's more expecting that, yeah, I'm going to have some errant shots, but I have this toolkit that I can access to make sure that I can limit the damage. And that's really the basis of my coaching.